I still remember the first time I stood at the edge of the pier, the fog rolling in so thick it seemed to swallow the horizon whole. The air was cold, tasting of salt and rust, and the only sound was the slow groan of the old lighthouse turning its beam across the dark water. Each sweep of the light cut through the mist like a pale blade, revealing for just a second the black waves stretching endlessly into the night. I had been traveling for hours, guided only by the sound of the tide and the faint hum of the lantern inside that tower. The shoreline was empty, silent, but I swear, I could hear footsteps crunching the wet gravel just a few paces behind me. When I turned, there was no one there, only the faint shape of the lighthouse flickering in the distance. There is something about lighthouses, something more than stone and glass. They feel alive, like watchful guardians or lonely prisoners bound to the coast. Sailors whisper about voices in the fog, about lanterns that never burn out, and about shadows seen climbing the stairs that should have been locked for years. That night, I thought I was alone. But then, I saw the beam of the lighthouse pause as if it was looking straight at me, and that's when I knew. I never should have followed the light. The sea was calm that night. Too calm. I remember the stillness before I fell asleep. The way the walls of the old lighthouse seemed to breathe with the wind. It wasn't a hotel anymore, just a converted inn with 3 rooms and the faint smell of salt trapped in the wood. I was the only guest. The owner had said goodnight hours ago, his footsteps fading down the narrow hall. After that, only the low hum of the sea. I couldn't sleep. The air felt heavy, like a curtain drawn too close. Outside, the fog had started to roll in, pale, slow, swallowing the coastline 1 inch at a time. From my window, I could see the rocks below, dark teeth breaking the waves, and then a light, a small, trembling glow, far out where the tide curled around the base of the cliffs. At first, I thought it was a fisherman, but no boats had been out since sundown. Locals said the sea here was too unpredictable after dark. I pressed closer to the glass. The lantern flickered once, then steadied. Yellow, steady, old. Something about it felt alive. When I mentioned it earlier that evening, the innkeeper just shook his head. "Nobody's lit that lamp in decades," he'd said. "It burned itself out the night the keeper vanished." I'd laughed then. But now, watching that same glow cut through the fog, it didn't feel funny anymore. I told myself it was just a reflection, a trick of light. Maybe the moon breaking through mist, but I couldn't shake it. That quiet pull, like it wanted me to see. I slipped on my coat. The hallway was colder than before. Boards creaked beneath my feet, soft and uneven, like the building was exhaling in its sleep. Outside, the fog swallowed everything. The beam from the old tower didn't move anymore. It had long been retired. Only that one lantern, far down the path. It swayed gently, left, right, like it was waiting. The rocks were slick underfoot. Every step sounded too loud against the whisper of the tide. My breath fogged the air, pale clouds vanishing as soon as they formed. As I got closer, the light dimmed. Not fading, just pulling away. Like it was leading me somewhere, I followed. Through the mist, through the wet grass that brushed against my legs. Every few steps I'd lose sight of it. Then it would flicker again, a pulse in the dark, a heartbeat. It felt almost kind, reassuring, like someone guiding me home. But then, I realized I couldn't hear the waves anymore, only my own footsteps, and something else. A faint rustling, close, and then gone. I stopped, listened. The air buzzed. Low electric, the kind of silence that feels heavier than noise. When I turned, the inn had vanished behind the fog. Only the lantern remained. Still glowing, still moving, my boots slipped on the stones. Cold water lapped at my ankles. The smell of rust and salt thickened the air. I called out once, just to break the quiet. My voice didn't echo. It sank like a stone into deep water. The lantern bobbed again, closer this time, close enough to see the shape of the glass, cracked, blackened at the rim. And something beneath it, a hand. Just a glimpse, pale fingers clutching the handle. Then gone. My chest tightened. I tried to step back, but my heel caught the edge of the rock. When I looked down, I saw footprints beside mine, wet, fresh, not leading toward the light. But around me, circling, the lantern swayed again. Not ahead now, behind. I turned, but the fog folded in, endless white and shadow. Everywhere I looked, that faint glow flickered, shifting places. To my left, then to my right, then behind my shoulder, always just out of reach. My heartbeat slowed, not from calm, but from something deeper. Recognition. I wasn't being led anywhere. It was keeping me here. Each time I followed, the ground felt the same. The same crack in the rock, the same pool of seawater, the same half-buried rope brushing my ankle. It wasn't leading me forward. It was circling me back. The realization came soft, not sudden, not sharp. Just a quiet truth sinking into the fog. I wasn't lost. I was being kept. The lantern dimmed then, slow, deliberate. Its glow thinning to a faint outline in the mist. And in that fading light, I saw them. Figures, standing where the fog was thickest, still, watching. Their outlines rippled, like shadows caught beneath the surface of water. Each one holding a lantern, each one flickering, almost in rhythm. Then the glow vanished. All at once, the fog swallowed the sea, the rocks, the world. Only the chill remained, that soft pressure of unseen air pressing close. I turned, searching for the path back to the inn. But every direction looked the same. Every sound, the same low hum. Somewhere behind me, a match struck, a single spark. Then, the lantern glowed again, right where I'd started, waiting, still burning, as if it had never dimmed at all. The sea was quiet tonight. Too quiet, just the soft push of water against the hull, the hiss of the tide brushing wood, and somewhere far off, a bell, tolling once, then fading into mist. I was alone, drifting between nothing and nowhere. The fog had rolled in thick, pressing against the deck like breath on glass. The lantern at the bow burned low, its flame pale and trembling, barely holding shape. Every few seconds, the light flickered, the way a pulse weakens before it stops. I'd been sailing since dusk. No wind, no moon, just the steady hum of the motor, quiet as a whisper beneath my feet. Then, I heard it, faint, like someone speaking through water. A cluster of voices, carried across the waves. At first, I thought it was a radio, static and low chatter, the kind you hear between ships late at night. But my radio was off. I checked twice, still, the voices lingered, short bursts of words. Numbers, maybe. 37. West by 4. Then a pause. North Drift, Market. It sounded distant, like a crew calling coordinates to one another. Calm, steady, routine. But there were no lights out there. No ships. Only fog. The water rippled once just beneath the hull, a slow circle spreading outward. And with it, another voice, this one softer, closer. I leaned over the rail. Hello? Nothing. Only my echo slipping back into the fog. Then a response, almost immediate. A whisper shaped like my own voice, repeating the word. Hello? The air tightened around me. My hands froze against the wood. For a long moment, I didn't breathe. The fog pulsed, folding in waves that shimmered with faint light, like lightning trapped beneath water. The voices began again, overlapping. Too many, too close. I could hear them shifting tones, repeating coordinates, then sentences, fragments, familiar ones. Keep the light steady. Don't go too far. Words I'd said earlier that night. Each one carried back to me, broken, replayed, almost human. The wind picked up, brushing my cheek cold and wet. I gripped the tiller, forcing myself to focus on the horizon, though there was no horizon left to see. Just fog, endless and soft. The voices wove through it, rising and falling like the tide. Sometimes they came from far off. Sometimes from the water just beside me. I tried to ignore them, to believe they were tricks of sound, reflections, echoes caught between air and sea. But they grew clearer. I could hear the breath between each phrase, could feel the vibration through the boards. Then silence. All at once, the waves stilled. The motor stuttered and went quiet. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. For a moment, I thought I'd gone deaf. Then, a single voice rose through the fog, low, level, barely more than a whisper. It spoke slowly, syllable by syllable. Each one drawn out, almost tender. My name, not shouted, not called, just spoken. I froze. The way you do when something touches the back of your neck in the dark. It came again, closer. My name, wrapped in static, shaped exactly like my voice. The lantern on the bow flickered violently, then steadied into a thin white glow. Through it I saw movement, ripples, forming into shapes, the impression of shoulders, a head, a mouth just breaking the surface, then gone. Another whisper. This time behind me, my name, again. The deck shifted underfoot. The boards creaked one after another as if someone were walking from stern to bow. Slowly, carefully. I turned, but there was nothing. Just the dim outline of ropes, wet and trembling from the cold. The fog pressed closer, swallowing the light. It felt heavier now, thicker, like standing inside a lung that had stopped breathing. Then the voice changed, no longer calm. It began to stutter, replaying the same words, looping them. Come back, come back, come back. Each repetition blurred into the next until it sounded less like language and more like water spilling through cracks. I tried to start the motor. It didn't move. The switch clicked against my fingers, hollow and useless. When I looked down, condensation had gathered on the metal, tiny beads rolling toward the drain. They trembled as the next whisper rose, this one directly in my ear. My name again, but softer, almost kind. I felt warmth brush the back of my neck, breath that wasn't mine. And for one small moment I almost answered, almost set it back, but the sea was watching, and the fog had gone still again. The voices stopped, all at once. Only silence remained, deep and wide, like the pause before something speaks again. Then the motor coughed back to life. The lantern steadied. The fog began to lift, curling upward into the night. The water around me was calm, empty, but the air still hummed, like a voice waiting to be used again. And when I finally looked down, into the reflection trembling below the bow, I saw my mouth move first. Before I did, the storm had passed by morning, but the air inside the lighthouse still felt wet. Every breath tasted like rust and salt. The walls were cold to the touch, heavy with years of sea spray and silence. I climbed the spiral steps slowly. Each footfall echoed too long, as if the tower wasn't empty after all. At the top, the light chamber waited, a glass cage of mirrors and dust. The great lens stood in the center. Tall as a man, its edges gleamed faintly in the dim gray daylight that leaked through the fog. I'd come up to see it closer, to understand how something so old could still catch light like that. The glass curved in perfect rings, one behind another, bending my reflection into 100 faces. Each one slightly wrong, some stretched, some warped, some too sharp around the eyes. When I moved, they moved. A single wave of mirrored motion. Dozens of me, rippling in silence. For a while, I just watched them, fascinated by how the beam twisted through each layer, how every breath I took fractured into pale ghosts. Then I noticed it. One reflection, near the center. Still, it didn't follow when I tilted my head. Didn't blink when I blinked. It only stared. I leaned closer, the boards creaking beneath my boots. The air felt thicker there, almost warm. My pulse slowed, steady and loud in my ears. The reflection's face was mine, but softer, tired, like it had been awake longer than I had. Its eyes blinked once, slow, deliberate, and then the beam turned. A wash of light swept across the chamber, scattering every reflection into white. When it passed, the still one was gone. I stepped back, breath shallow. Told myself it was a trick. The lens was old, the glass imperfect, but as I watched the light spin again, I saw it return. There, in the same spot, frozen. The others moved with me. That one did not. I tried to ignore it, walking around the lens, my fingers brushing the cold metal frame. Each rotation of the beam threw the room into shifting brightness, slicing the fog beyond the windows into thin ribbons of glow. Every time the light crossed my face, my reflection vanished. And when the darkness returned, so did it, still staring. I could feel it now. That faint hum in the floorboards. The quiet weight of being watched. The longer I stood there, the less it felt like I was in control of my own movements. Like I was the reflection, and it was deciding when I blinked. I whispered, barely sound. "Who are you?" My voice broke softly against the glass. The reflection's lips didn't move, but its eyes did. They shifted. Not toward me, but behind me. I turned fast. Only the stairs, only the dark. When I faced the lens again, the reflection was closer. The rest still mirrored my every move, except that one. It lingered, a half-second behind, as if dragging through slower time. The beam swung past once more. Light. White. Gone. I waited for it to come back. When it did, the reflection hadn't vanished this time. It stayed. The light didn't erase it anymore. Something cold brushed the back of my neck, like a breath. I stumbled backward, hitting the railing. Below, the tower yawned open, the spiral vanishing into shadow. The lens turned again, groaning through its rotation. Each second it faced me felt longer. The still reflection now stood exactly as I did. Head tilted, eyes unblinking, mouth barely open, like it was about to speak. I could hear the faint hum deep in the glass, a vibration almost alive. Each pass of the light grew slower. Like the mechanism was straining to keep up, the reflection's expression changed. A twitch at the corner of the mouth. A half-smile that didn't belong to me. The next time the beam swept by, I saw movement in the glass. A hand. From inside, reaching toward the surface, I ran. Down the spiral steps, the metal railings slick under my grip. The air thick with dust and breath and the echo of my own footsteps. But the light followed me, spinning, sweeping, searching. Each turn slower than the last. Each rotation holding longer. By the time I reached the base, I could see its glow crawling across the walls. A pale, circling pulse. I looked once more toward the top. The lens was still moving, but the reflection inside it, the one that didn't belong, stayed perfectly still. Watching. The light washed over me again. For just a second, I saw another shape in the glass, standing where I had been, looking out. Moving only when I didn't. Then the beam turned once more, and all that remained was silence. The storm passed just before dawn. By morning, the beach was quiet again. Only the low hiss of waves folding over themselves. Only the soft hum of wind threading through the grass. The air smelled different after rain, sharp, like metal and salt. I walked down toward the shore, my boots sinking into wet sand. The tide had pulled strange things in overnight, pieces of driftwood scattered along the line where the waves broke and retreated. Some were smooth, polished by time. Others looked burnt, split and blackened at the edges, as if they'd been pulled from a fire before being set adrift. I bent to pick one up. It was small, rounded, almost like a bone. The surface was carved, thin grooves curling around each other in slow, repeating circles. Not letters, not language, just rhythm. The pattern caught the light in a strange way. It almost shimmered. I found another piece further up the beach. Long, pale, sharpened to a point. The grain of the wood was too clean, too new. It hadn't been in the sea long, but no boats had passed here in days. No footprints but mine. The horizon was pale and empty, the fog just beginning to settle again. Still, I felt watched. Not from the water, from the land behind me. When I turned, the cabin looked smaller than it should have. Lonely, pressed against the edge of the dunes. Its window caught the morning light, reflecting it like a single blind eye. I took the piece of wood with me. I don't know why. It felt wrong to leave it there, like it had been waiting to be found. Inside, the air was still damp. My lantern from the night before hung by the door. The flame burned out to a thin thread of smoke. I set the driftwood on the table beside it. The pattern carved into it looked different now. Not circular, more like a sequence. 5 lines, then 2, then 5 again. A rhythm. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, pause, tap, 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 tap. I brushed my thumb over it. The grooves were fresh. No salt, no age. As if someone had carved it this morning. I left it where it was. By evening, the tide had risen high. The wind returned, soft but restless. It rattled the shutters, made the walls breathe. I tried not to listen. But when you're alone, even small sounds begin to stretch. The quiet grows teeth. Sometime after midnight, I heard it. A faint tapping against the wall. At first, I thought it was the window pane, loose from the storm. But the rhythm was too deliberate. 5, 2, 5, exactly like the marks carved into the wood. The sound came again, slow, measured, like fingers against glass. I sat up. The lantern by the bed cast a dim circle on the ceiling, trembling with every breath I took. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, pause, tap, 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 tap. The pattern didn't change. It never changed. I went to the window. Outside, the fog had returned, thick and unmoving. The beach was gone beneath it. The sea too quiet to be real. The tapping moved. From the wall to the door. I turned slowly. The sound followed the wood, as if tracing the outline of the cabin itself. It stayed low to the ground, dragging along the baseboards, then rising toward the windows again. I whispered, "Who's there?" Nothing, just the rhythm. I stepped closer to the table. The driftwood sat where I'd left it, but the carving looked deeper now, freshly cut lines where smooth grooves had been before. I watched as another mark appeared. Right there, right in front of me, the grain split slightly, a tiny curl of wood peeling back. Something unseen had carved it again. Tap, I backed away, my shoulder hitting the wall. The tapping grew faster, circling the cabin from outside, as though whatever had made the driftwood was tracing the walls, counting each plank. The rhythm broke only when the lantern flickered out. In the darkness, the sound changed. It wasn't tapping anymore. It was scratching. Long strokes, like something carving. When the light finally caught again, faint, pale from the dying wick, I looked to the door. A small piece of driftwood lay at the base of it. Wet. New. I picked it up, hands shaking. 5 lines, then 2, then 5 again. The same pattern, but now in between them, a shape, a window. And inside that window lies a single mark, a figure, standing exactly where I was. The air outside went still. No wind, no waves, only the faint rhythm of water dripping from the eaves. Then, softly, from the other side of the wall, tap, 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 tap. This time, the sound matched my heartbeat. And I realized, slowly, it wasn't knocking to come in, it was marking where I was. The fog hadn't lifted all day. It pressed against the lighthouse like a hand against glass. By nightfall, the air inside felt close, heavy. Like the sea itself had crept into the walls. I stayed in the old keeper's quarters, a narrow room below the main tower, with low ceilings and a single iron bed. The floorboards swelled from years of salt and rain. Each one creaked under my weight. I'd grown used to the quiet here, the kind that feels thick enough to hold. But that night, the quiet had a rhythm, a slow, deliberate rhythm. Boots, pacing above me. They started sometime after midnight. Heavy steps crossing from one end of the upper floor to the other, then pausing, then turning back. At first, I thought it was the wind. The tower settling, but the steps were too steady. Too human. I held my breath, listening. The pattern didn't change. Even measured, dragging slightly at the heel. Someone was walking. The old keeper's quarters were supposed to be sealed, the upper rooms long abandoned. No one else stayed here. I rose quietly from bed. The lantern on the table still burned with a weak yellow flame. Its light barely reached the corners of the room. The boards felt cold under my bare feet. Each one flexed with a soft groan as I crossed to the stairwell. The footsteps stopped. Right as I touched the first step, silence fell like a held breath. I waited, heart slow but loud in my chest. Nothing. I climbed. The wood sighed under each footfall. When I reached the landing, I saw only shadows. The long corridor where the keeper once slept. The faint shimmer of the fog pressing against the windows. No movement. No sound. But the air was warm up there. Too warm. As if someone had been standing there moments before. I walked the length of the hall, each door still shut. Each lock rusted, untouched for years. The lantern light quivered against the walls, revealing old boot marks pressed deep into the dust. Some newer than others. I told myself it was my imagination, that maybe the wind had caught the rafters in just the right way. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, the kind of watching that waits for you to turn around. When I went back down, the silence followed, thick, waiting. I set the lantern by my bed and lay down again. My pulse slowed. The fog outside hummed softly against the glass. Then, bootsteps. Not above this time. But down the hall, the sound came from the stairs. Each step deliberate, slow, wood-bending, weight-shifting. Someone, or something, was coming down. I stared at the doorway. The lantern flickered, throwing pale shapes against the walls. The footsteps paused halfway, then started again. Closer, the air in the room changed. It pressed tight around my chest. The boards beneath the door shivered. The steps stopped just outside. A faint scrape followed, like boots turning toward the door. I could hear breathing now. Low, raspy, wet. The handle didn't move. It never did. But the shadow beneath the door shifted, a faint outline of movement. Like someone adjusting their weight, I whispered. "Who's there?" The breathing stopped. For a moment, the world stood still. Then the footsteps turned away. Slowly retracing each stair upward, fading into the ceiling again, I didn't move, didn't breathe. When the sound vanished completely, I waited, counting seconds until the silence began to sound normal again. I must have drifted somewhere between sleep and waking. But the rhythm returned, boots above me, the same pace, back and forth, each pass growing slower, heavier, until the floor above creaked once more, right above my bed. Then stillness, the kind that hums inside your skull. I stared at the ceiling, watching dust drift in the lantern light, and then faintly from behind the wall, a knock, soft, rhythmic, 3 slow taps, then silence. I sat up. The air smelled of salt and something old, like wet rope or iron left too long in the sea. When I looked at the floor, I saw footprints, not mine. Large, wet outlines pressed into the boards, leading from the door to the foot of my bed. They stopped there. My mouth went dry. The lantern flame thinned to a trembling thread. From above, the boots began again. Only now, they didn't move away. They moved with mine. When I stood, they stopped. When I stepped forward, they followed. One beat behind, echoing me. By the time I reached the stairs, I realized the sound wasn't above anymore. It was beside me. Matching every move, I didn't climb. I didn't turn. I just stood there, listening to the rhythm of steps that didn't belong to me. The fog pressed harder against the window. The lantern dimmed, and somewhere in the dark, a voice exhaled, low and close enough to stir the hair at my ear. The boots shifted once more. A single step closer. Then the weight of silence fell again, heavy, complete, like it had never moved at all. The sea was quiet that night. Too quiet for this coast. Fog rolled in after dusk, thick, unmoving, like a blanket pressed against the world. From the tower window, I could barely see the rocks below. Just the slow pulse of the tide and the white breath of the waves breaking somewhere out of sight. That was when I heard it. The bell. Low, distant, metal carried through fog and salt air. It rang once, and the sound lingered, longer than it should, like the sea itself had swallowed it, then let it go again. At first I thought it was just a memory, a trick of the wind against the cliffs. The signal bell had been gone for years, its frame rusted away, its chain removed when the newer beacon was built. But then it rang again. A little slower, a little deeper. Each toll seemed to come from farther out, from somewhere beneath the horizon. I stepped outside. The air clung to my skin, wet, heavy, cold. The fog was so thick I could barely see the edge of the walkway. The lantern light dissolved before it touched the ground. Still, the bell kept ringing, each note softer, weaker, as if sinking through the mist. It was impossible, but it was there. I followed the sound down the slope. The grass slick under my boots, the air full of salt and something older, iron maybe, or blood. The rocks below glistened with seawater and moonlight. Beyond them, the black expanse of the tide shifted like breathing. Another toll, then another. I knew the rhythm. 3 long rings. Pause, 1 short. The same pattern they used to warn ships off the reef, but no one manned that bell anymore. And there was no wind strong enough to move it. I walked closer. The sound came from the direction of the old mooring posts, half submerged now, tilting at strange angles in the surf. The fog bell had once hung there above the deepest inlet. Now only its broken frame remained, yet the tone was coming from below, beneath the surface. The water moved like breath over glass, dark, endless. I knelt at the edge, the cold biting through my sleeves. When the next toll came, the water rippled with it, circles spreading outward, slow, steady, like a heartbeat beneath the waves. I could see it then. Faint, pale shapes twisting under the surface, metal, chain. The bell itself, half buried in silt and coral, but it moved. Gently rocking, as if still hung from something unseen, each time it swung, it rang. Soft, muffled, like it was ringing from another world entirely. The water shimmered with each vibration. The fog above it trembled. I felt it in my teeth, in my ribs. The sound wasn't just outside anymore. It was in me. Slowly, I reached toward it. The tide lapped over my hand. Freezing. Thick. Beneath the surface, the bell glowed faintly, a dull, silvery pulse like breath under glass. For a moment, I thought I saw shapes around it. Figures drifting, their outlines bending in the current. Not fish, not shadows, something else. The next ring came softer. Then softer still, the movement slowed, as if the tide itself was tiring. I leaned closer. Close enough to see my reflection fracture in the ripples. The face looking back didn't move when I did. It just watched me, eyes open, mouth closed, listening. Another toll. It sounded almost human now. Like a voice calling through metal and water. The bell sank a little deeper. Its light faded. I waited for one more ring. But it didn't come. Only the hush of the sea, and the faint hum of fog against my ear. I stayed there until dawn. The tide withdrew slowly, revealing stones slick with salt and memory. Where the bell had been, there was only sand. No chain, no metal. No trace of sound, but the stillness didn't feel empty. It felt aware, like something had passed through and paused long enough to be heard. The air was warmer when the sun rose. The fog began to lift, and for a moment I thought I saw the outline of the bell again, half a mile out, floating just above the water. Then it shimmered, bent in the light, and was gone. Now sometimes, when the tide is high and the fog presses low against the shore, I think I can still hear it. A single toll, soft, slow. Not a warning anymore, not a call for help. Just a voice, somewhere beneath the waves, ringing for whoever still listens. The mornings were quiet that week. The sea had gone still, the air soft and gray, as if the world was waiting for something. I woke before sunrise, drawn to the sound of the tide brushing the rocks below the lighthouse. The water moved gently, carrying seaweed, driftwood, and something pale that caught against the stones. At first I thought it was trash, a scrap of paper, folded and torn, edges soaked with salt. But when I picked it up, the ink was still visible, thin lines curling like waves. A letter, written in a sailor's hand. Only a few words were readable. Storm, north, 2 gone over. The rest had bled away. The sea claiming what it didn't want me to know. I brought it inside, laid it near the lantern to dry. The paper smelled faintly of iron, like old nails and rain. By noon, another scrap washed ashore. Then another the next day, each one with more words, more detail, dates, coordinates. I realized they weren't old. They described things that hadn't happened yet, storms that hadn't formed, ships that hadn't sunk. One mentioned the Eveline, a supply vessel that passed here every other month. The letter said it would strike the reef before dawn. I didn't believe it, not until 3 days later, when the foghorn sounded and the rescue boats went out. The Eveline never came back. After that, I started keeping the scraps in a box by my bed. They came in with each new tide, as if the sea was writing them, piece by piece, to someone who'd listen. Sometimes I'd find them wedged between rocks, other times floating just beyond reach, always when the water was coldest, the air sharp and still, the handwriting never changed, slanted, precise, the kind of penmanship learned by men who spend too long at sea. I read every one carefully, quietly. Each letter described a storm, and each storm arrived exactly as written. The words began to feel alive under my fingertips, the salt softening the paper, the ink sinking deeper with every tide. I began to wonder who was sending them, or when. One morning after a sleepless night, I went down to the waterline before sunrise. The fog was heavy, hanging low over the sea. The horizon was gone, the sky and water the same color, a dull gray-white that swallowed sound. Something fluttered near my boot. Another letter, this one was dry, untouched by the tide. I opened it slowly. The handwriting was the same, but the ink looked fresher, blacker as if written that very hour. It began like the others, details, wind direction, pressure falling, then a line that made me pause. To the keeper at the White Tower. My breath caught. No one called it that anymore. Not for years, I read on. Your lantern will not save them. The sea will take what it has written. My hands shook. The ink bled where my thumb touched it. And at the bottom, a signature. I knew the name. The same one engraved on the rusted plaque by the door. Elias Ward, keeper, 1893. The man who had tended this lighthouse before it was decommissioned. The one who had vanished during the great storm. That night, I couldn't sleep. The letters rustled in their box like dry leaves. Outside, the tide was rising fast. I could hear it breathing against the rocks. At midnight, something tapped against the window. 3 soft knocks. Then nothing. I went to the glass. The fog pressed close, so thick it seemed to hum. When I opened the door, the wind had died completely. Only the hush of waves and the faint slap of paper against stone. Another letter waited at my feet. No envelope. Just a single sheet, creased and trembling in the damp air. I knelt to read it by the lantern's glow. The sea will write your name next. The rest of the words were smudged, washed away before I could see them. I looked out toward the shore. The water was higher now, lapping against the base of the tower. In the distance, something pale drifted between the waves. It looked like more paper, but it moved too deliberately. Following the current, coming closer. I stepped back, the air tightening in my chest. The lantern flickered once, then steadied. Outside, the tide whispered along the stones, carrying with it dozens of scraps, all turning slowly in the surf, like pages of a book coming undone. By dawn, the sea had gone still again. The rocks were bare. The box of letters by my bed was gone. Only one page remained, caught beneath the door. The ink was faint, the lines trembling. North wind. Low tide by morning. Small vessel. 1 soul aboard. Do not sail. The date at the top was tomorrow. I folded it once, then once more. The paper was damp, warm from my hand. I placed it back on the rocks, where the water could reach it. The tide took it instantly, like it already knew where to send it next. The air inside the lighthouse was colder than it should have been. It always was. The kind of cold that sits under your skin, quiet, waiting. I'd been meaning to check the lantern room for days. The beam had dimmed after last night's fog, and I wanted to see if the mechanism was jamming again. So just after midnight, I took the small lantern and started up the spiral stairs. The metal steps groaned beneath me, each one echoing softly up into the dark. The light slid across the walls, revealing patches of flaking paint, salt stains, and small shells embedded in the cracks. The sea had left its mark everywhere. The smell was familiar: damp stone, old oil, rust. A scent that clung to your breath when you exhaled. I counted the steps at first. It helped me keep steady. 63 to the top, that's what the old keeper's log said, but after 70, I hadn't reached the landing. I stopped, turned to look down. The stairs wound beneath me in perfect circles, disappearing into shadow. No sound but my own breathing. I must have miscounted, I thought. Maybe I'd started lower than I remembered. I kept climbing. The window slits along the wall began to show faint light. Stars, moving slowly behind the glass. At first, I thought it was the lantern flickering. But when I looked closer, I realized the stars were shifting too fast, spinning, almost pulsing, as if the sky itself was turning. The stairs felt steeper now. Each step pressed harder against my calves. The hum of the sea faded. All I could hear was my heartbeat, the soft rasp of my boots on metal, and the whisper of the lantern's flame as it tilted with my breath. Then, a sound above me. A slow creak, like a door opening. I froze. The flame bent sideways as if the air had moved. I called out, quietly. No answer. Only the echo of my own voice, spiraling upward until it thinned into nothing. The stairs went on, and on, and on. The windows showed no dawn, no horizon, only the blur of stars, dragging trails of pale light behind them, as if time itself was coming undone outside the glass. My lantern sputtered. I cupped my hand around it, the metal warm, the handle slick with sweat. When I looked up again, I could swear the curve of the staircase had changed. It felt tighter, narrower, as if the walls were leaning in. I climbed faster. My breath came short. The echo of my steps doubled, like someone was following just out of rhythm. I stopped. The other steps stopped too. I turned my lantern behind me. The light dissolved into darkness, too thick to touch. Nothing. But when I took one more step forward, the echo followed again. Softer this time, slower, matching the beat of my heart. I pressed my hand to the wall, cold, wet. The stone pulsed once beneath my palm, like something alive. I let go immediately. The lantern swung, casting dizzy arcs of light that scattered over the metal railing. Then, for just a second, I saw movement above me. A figure turning the corner, its shadow sliding up the next curve of the stairs. I ran. Each step rang hollow beneath my feet, a metallic rhythm that seemed to chase me in circles. My lungs burned. The lantern hissed, its flame trembling with every breath I took. I was certain I'd reached the top by now, but the stairs never ended. Only the stars kept changing, spinning faster. As if I was climbing through the sky itself, I shouted again, not for help, just to hear something human. The echo didn't come back. When the next window appeared, the stars were streaks now, thin lines of light cutting through black water. It felt like I was inside a bell jar. With the world turning outside, my legs gave out. I dropped to my knees, breath scraping against the silence, and then a door, right in front of me, wooden, warped from years of salt and wind. The door to the lantern room. I pushed it open with what strength I had left. Light burst through, not from the lantern, but from the stairwell itself. I stumbled forward and landed on cold tile. The smell hit me first. Sea air, oil, rust. When I looked up, I was standing at the bottom of the staircase again, the same lantern flickering in my hand, the same damp stone beneath my boots. The door above me gone, as if it had never existed, only the faint echo of footsteps fading upward, mine, or something else. The flame in my lantern steadied, then went out. I stood there in the dark, listening. The air felt heavier now, like the tower itself was breathing slow, and somewhere above, deep in the black spiral, a step creaked, as if someone else had just started climbing. The sea was gentle that night, the kind of gentle that doesn't last. The tide had rolled in without sound, a smooth breathing motion against the rocks. The air smelled faintly of salt and wet rope. The moon was thin, barely there, like a memory fading. I was sitting near the window, writing by lantern light, when I heard it, a hum. Low at first, almost hidden under the rhythm of the waves. Like the sea was breathing in tune with itself. I thought it might have been the wind in the cracks of the glass, or maybe the metal of the lantern cooling. But the sound didn't fade. It swelled, soft and steady, rising with each push of the tide. There was a pattern to it, a tune, faintly sweet, the kind you'd hum without thinking, half asleep, half dreaming. It reminded me of something my mother used to sing when storms rolled over the house. A lullaby meant to calm the noise outside. But this wasn't gentle. Not really. It only pretended to be. The hum grew clearer, curling through the cracks of the lighthouse door, vibrating faintly through the floorboards. The glass of the lantern trembled. When I leaned closer to the window, I could feel it against my teeth, a deep vibration. Like the sea itself was singing through bone. The melody rose and fell, slow, drawn out, as if each note came from miles away. I opened the door. The fog had come back, thick, silver, moving like breath over the water. The tide was high, lapping against the bottom step. Each wave glowed faintly, catching what little light the moon had left. The hum wove through it, a single tone bending in and out of tune. Not loud, but constant. I couldn't tell if it was human. It didn't feel like a voice, but it wasn't wind either. It was somewhere in between. I walked down to the edge of the rocks, boots sinking into wet sand. The sound seemed to come from everywhere. It filled the fog. It filled me. Every breath I took matched its rhythm. In, out, rise, fall. The waves shimmered as they moved, and for a moment, I thought I saw shapes beneath them, pale, swaying, like figures drifting in the current. The tune changed. It bent downward. Slower now, lower. The sweetness faded. Something darker began to pulse beneath it. A second tone that didn't belong. It was out of sync, clashing softly, like two people singing the same song from different places. The hair on my neck lifted. The hum pressed closer. Through the air, through the water, into my chest, I could feel it trying to match my heartbeat. And for a moment it did. The waves rose higher, curling over the rocks, spilling against my boots. The cold was sharp, thick with salt. The humming grew louder. It wasn't a melody anymore. It was speech, stretched thin, words just beneath hearing. I covered my ears, but the sound didn't stop. It slid inside, behind the noise of my pulse, behind my thoughts. Each note pressed deeper, sinking into the space between breaths. I could almost understand it. Not the meaning, but the feeling. It wasn't calling to me. It was calling through me, my vision blurred. The horizon bent slightly. The fog began to move in circles, drawn toward the sea like smoke to a flame. And under it all, the singing twisted again, slowly, carefully, turning into something like a laugh. I stepped back, nearly slipping on the slick stones. The lantern in my hand sputtered once, then went out completely. The dark was absolute. Only the sound remained. It rose into a single long note, so pure it hurt. The kind of sound that feels like it can peel you open from the inside. I clamped my hands over my head, but it didn't matter. The song kept rising. It filled every corner of me, and for a heartbeat, I thought I could hear my own voice singing with it. Then, silence, just the waves again. Soft, gentle, as if nothing had ever happened. The fog began to lift. The moonlight returned, spilling silver over the rocks. I stood there for a long time, the water washing over my feet. In the quiet, I could still feel the hum deep inside my skull, faint as breath. That night, when I lay in bed, the tide began to rise again, and somewhere between sleep and waking I heard it. The same tune, soft, sweet, carried through the walls as if the sea had found its way inside. I tried not to listen, but it was too late. The song was already mine. The wind was colder tonight. It carried the salt higher up the tower, where it clung to the iron railings and turned them white with frost. The sky was dark, a deep gray black that hid the horizon. Even the sea looked still, like it was holding its breath. I'd come up to the top balcony to check the light. It had been flickering again, the beam stuttering when it turned toward the east. That was where most of the wrecks happened. The shallow reef, the broken mast that still jutted out like a bone. The mechanism groaned as it moved. Metal against metal, a slow rotation that never truly stopped. I leaned over the railing. Below me, the lower balconies curved around the tower like ribs. Wet, rusting, empty, or they should have been. At first, I thought I saw a trick of the light, a pale shimmer along the rail just beneath mine. But when the beam swung away, I saw them, 2 hands, gripping the iron, still, motionless. Fingers pale and thin, the knuckles sharp beneath wet skin. No face. No shadow, just hands, as if someone was hanging there, just out of view. I froze. The light turned again, and as it swept past, the hands were gone. Only water streaks on the metal remained. Long trails, like something had been dragged away. I told myself it was nothing, a trick of fog, of fatigue, of the endless spinning beam that never truly let the dark settle. But I didn't go back inside. I waited, watching. Each time the light passed over the sea, it caught fragments of fog rolling, shifting, as though something beneath it was moving. Then the light turned back toward the tower. And there they were again, this time lower. On the balcony just below, the same hands, fingers curling around the rail, gripping tighter. They didn't move when the beam hit them. They only vanished when it passed, as if the light itself erased them. But each time the lantern turned, they came back higher, climbing balcony by balcony. The wind began to rise, sliding through the gaps in the railing, carrying a low hum that almost sounded like breathing. I backed away from the edge. The iron beneath my boots trembled, not from the wind, but from something inside the tower. A dull vibration, like footsteps moving up the spiral stairs, slow, measured, wet. I pressed my palm to the cold door. The hum of the light behind me kept turning, slowly, steadily, cutting the night into bright and dark. Bright and dark. Every time it turned, I looked down, and every time, they were closer. The hands were level with the third balcony now, close enough that I could see the skin, pale but not lifeless. It glistened, like something newly pulled from the sea. The fingers flexed once, leaving faint prints on the rail before vanishing again with the turn of the light. My throat tightened. I told myself to move, to step inside, to close the door, but my legs wouldn't listen. The beam turned again. Higher this time. The hands had reached the next level. The fingers curled tighter, nails scraping faintly against the metal. Each rotation brought them closer. One floor, then another, then another. By the time the light completed its 5th turn, they were almost at mine. I could hear it now. Not just the wind, but a soft dragging sound. Wet against the iron, the kind of noise a soaked rope makes when it's pulled too tight. The air smelled like rust and seaweed, thick, sharp. I stepped back again. My hand found the lantern by the door, the glass still warm from when I'd lit it. I raised it, hoping the light would hold them back. The main beam swung around once more. It caught the top of the rail. For a split second, I saw them. The hands, now gripping the edge of my balcony, they were shaking. Not from weakness, but from effort. From the strain of pulling something heavy, then the light turned away. Darkness again. I stumbled backward. The door handle was slick under my palm. I shoved it open, nearly falling inside. The spiral stairs waited, a narrow throat of stone winding down into shadow. The hum of the light echoed through the walls. I could still hear the dragging, closer now, from the platform outside. Then silence. When the beam came around again, it shone through the slit of the door. Just a stripe of light cutting through the dark. I waited for the hands to reappear, but they didn't. Only the creak of the railing in the wind, only the faint hiss of the tide below. When I finally stepped forward to close the door, I noticed the marks on the outside. 2 handprints, clear, pressed deep into the rust, still wet, still dripping. I wiped one away. The metal beneath was cold, and then, from far below, something touched the base of the tower, a soft thud, like a hand finding the next rung, and the light kept turning. Round and round, never stopping, never saving. It was early winter when I found it. The air in the lighthouse had gone damp again, salt collecting in a thin crust along the window frames. I'd been cleaning the desk, an old thing, oak and rusted at the hinges, when one of the drawers stuck halfway. Inside was a book, a small swollen journal. Its leather was soft and slick, like something that had been pulled from the sea. The latch was sealed shut with salt, and when I pried it open, a faint smell came out, wet paper, iron, and something faintly sweet. The first page was nearly gone. The ink bled out into gray veins, but deeper in, the words were clearer. Dates written in faded blue, entries marked in a careful hand. They were old, decades. Names I didn't know, descriptions of storms I'd only heard about. The last entry stopped mid-sentence, as if the writer had been called away. I set the journal aside, thinking it would crumble before morning. But it didn't. The next day, the paper was dry, and there were more pages than before. At first, I thought I'd miscounted. Old books swell when they dry. That's all it was. But when I flipped through it again, I found new writing. The ink was darker, the hand more recent. It mentioned me. The entry described the night before, how I'd fallen asleep at the desk, how I'd left the lantern burning too long, even the way I'd dreamt of waves pressing against the walls. I stared at the words for a long time. The page was still damp, fresh. I closed the book, locked the drawer, left it that way, but the next morning the drawer was open, and another page had appeared. This one described the morning itself, how I'd found the gull tangled in the ropes, how I'd buried it behind the lighthouse, how the tide had risen while I worked. I felt the air leave my chest, because I hadn't done those things yet, not until hours later. When I went outside that afternoon, I found the gull, exactly where the entry said it would be, the same color of twine, the same broken wing, the same stillness. I didn't write anything that day. I couldn't. But that night, the journal was waiting for me again. Its pages rippled slightly, like breath under the skin. The newest entry said, "He reads this now." I stopped. The ink bled slowly as I stared, lines softening, words sinking into the paper like they were dissolving. My throat was dry. The light outside turned across the room, cutting through the fog on the window. Everything went white for a second. Then the beam moved on. I waited for the silence to settle, for the hum of the lamp above to steady again. It did, and when I looked back down, there was another line written beneath the first. He wonders if he's alone. My hand twitched. The pen I'd left beside the journal rolled, slowly, then stopped. I didn't touch the book again. Not that night. But I didn't sleep either. Every creak in the walls sounded like the desk drawer opening. Every gust of wind against the glass felt like breath. In the morning, I found salt crusted along the edge of the drawer again, the kind that forms when water dries overnight. I didn't open it. I worked through the day, keeping busy, listening to the foghorn groan out across the water. But when the sun dropped, I gave in. I pulled the drawer open and saw the journal waiting, heavier now, thicker. The pages turned on their own when I lifted it. They fell open to the last entry. The handwriting had changed again, rougher, shaking. It said, "He will go to the door soon." I didn't move. My eyes followed the ink, the slow trails of it spreading across the paper as if it were still being written. He hears something behind him. The words appeared as I read them. Letter by letter, my neck prickled. The window behind me was dark, no reflection, just a smear of pale light from the lantern. The book trembled in my hands. He doesn't want to look. The next line appeared slowly. The pen wasn't there, no hand. Just words, rising through the paper like veins. I closed the book fast, pressed it shut. My fingers left wet marks on the cover. When I set it down, the air in the room felt colder. Salt stung my throat. I didn't write anything that night. I didn't move from the chair until the beam passed overhead again, and when it did, I noticed something. The journal was open again, just one line, written at the bottom of the page. He finally looks. I turned toward the window, and there, in the faint reflection of the glass, a figure stood behind me, its hand resting on the back of my chair. Its skin glistened like wet paper, and as the beam turned again, the reflection vanished. But the smell of salt never left the room. The fog that morning was heavier than usual. It sat low over the water, rolling in slow waves that hid the horizon. The sea was quiet, almost too quiet. No gulls, no current, just the faint creak of the dock beneath me. I remember thinking how still everything felt. How the air clung to my skin, cold and damp, like breath that refused to fade. That's when I saw it. A lantern, swinging somewhere out in the mist. Just a dull glow at first, moving side to side, slowly drifting closer. I thought maybe it was one of the local fishing boats. Someone returning late. But no one had gone out that night. The sea had been too rough. The light drew nearer, soft orange against the gray. And then through the veil of fog, the boat appeared. Small, wooden, weathered but floating steady. Its nets hung over the side, dripping. The lantern was hooked near the bow, its glass fogged from inside, casting a warm, shivering light. I called out. No answer, only the quiet lap of water against the hull, the sound deep and slow like breathing. I stepped closer to the edge of the dock, trying to see through the mist. There was movement, not people, but fabric, clothes, hung neatly along the rail. Shirts, jackets, trousers, still wet, still dripping. They swayed gently, as if someone had just left them there. The boat bumped against the dock. A soft thud. It didn't drift away. The rope that once tied it to something was torn, frayed to a white edge. Yet it floated perfectly still, waiting. I hesitated, then stepped on. The boards flexed under my weight, a tired groan rising from below. The air smelled of iron and salt, thick, metallic, like the taste of blood on your tongue. I moved slowly, eyes searching the deck. No footprints, no signs of life. But the clothes, they were still dripping. Drops slid from the sleeves to the floorboards, darkening them one by one. I touched one of the jackets. Cold. Slick. The kind of cold that sinks in, that feels like it's waiting. The lantern flickered. Once. Then steadied again. There was a chair near the helm, turned toward the open sea. A pipe rested on the seat, half-burnt tobacco still inside, but no ash on the deck. Everything looked used. Just not recently. I found a small tin cup beside a bucket filled halfway with seawater. Something floated in it, a torn piece of paper, edges soft and frayed. No words. Just lines, like something drawn in haste. A curve, a shape. It looked almost like a coastline. Then the fog shifted, and the water around the boat rippled. For a moment I thought I saw shadows moving beneath it. Shapes that didn't belong to waves, long, slow, reaching. I froze. My breath caught. The lantern's glow thinned barely enough to see the rail, and then a sound, dripping. But not from the clothes this time. It came from the deck, from behind me. When I turned, the wet footprints were already there, just one set, leading from the stern to where I stood, each step fresh, shining. I stepped back. The boat rocked. The lantern swayed. I whispered something, a question maybe. But the air swallowed it. The footprints stopped a few feet away, then slowly began to fade, the water sinking into the wood, leaving no trace behind. Only the sound remained, a soft rhythm, like water tapping inside a hollow hull. I wanted to leave, to climb back to the dock, but when I looked that way, there was nothing but fog. No shore, no outline of the lighthouse, just white stretching forever. I waited. The sea didn't move, and then the lantern flickered again, once, twice, and I saw them, hands, pale, just below the surface, dozens of them, gripping the underside of the boat. fingers curled tight, water sliding down their wrists. The boat rocked gently, not sinking, just held. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. The light went out, and in the dark I could still feel the motion beneath me. The slow lift, the quiet pull. The air thickened with salt. The fog pressed closer. It felt like being swallowed whole. Then, all at once, the rocking stopped. When I opened my eyes again, I was back on the dock. The boat was gone. The water smooth. The fog thinning. But there, at the edge of the planks, hung a single wet jacket, still dripping. Still warm, as if someone had just stepped out of it. It was early evening when I found it. The air in the lighthouse had turned heavy, salt pressing through the cracks in the walls the way it does before a storm. I'd been patching a loose floorboard near the desk in the keeper's room. The wood gave a hollow sound when I stepped on it, like there was something hidden underneath. I pried it open. Beneath the splintered plank was a small space packed with dust and grit, and lying in the middle, a brass key, old, cold. Its teeth were bent at strange angles, its surface dark with age. When I held it, it left a faint green stain across my fingertips. It didn't look like it belonged to anything in the lighthouse. Still, I felt drawn to it, like it wanted to be used. I tried it on the first door I found, the storage closet by the stairs. The key turned slightly, then caught. The metal protested, but the lock refused. The next door, then the next. Each one resisted, like something inside didn't want me to enter. By the time I reached the upper floor, the key had left a thin film of brass dust on my hand. The air smelled faintly metallic, and underneath it, something damp. I don't know why, but I took it down to the base of the lighthouse, where the stone walls sweat with salt and the floor stays slick no matter how dry the day is. There's a hatch there, half hidden behind a stack of old rope and tools. I'd never opened it before. The hinges were red with rust, the bolts fused into the frame. But when I brushed them with my fingers, the key in my hand seemed to warm. It fit perfectly. The turn was slow, stiff. Each click echoed through the foundation. Then the hatch shifted open. A rush of cold air slid out. Wet, sharp, like the breath of the sea itself. Behind the door was water. It filled the space below the lighthouse, lapping gently against the stone. Dark, reflective, moving with the faint rhythm of the tide. At first I thought it was a flooded chamber, but the surface was too still. Too quiet. It didn't connect to anything I could see. Just a pit of seawater, deep and black. The smell was stronger there, salt and rot, old wood and metal. My eyes adjusted slowly, catching flashes in the water as if something pale stirred beneath it. I crouched. The air hummed in my ears. The lantern in my hand flickered, its flame bending toward the open hatch like it was being drawn in. I should have closed it then. I know that now, but I leaned closer. The surface rippled once. Then again. Each wave smaller than the last, as though something below was rising. The pale shape came clearer. Smooth, colorless, long. At first I thought it was driftwood, but it rolled in the water and I saw what looked like a hand, just the outline of it, curling upward. I stumbled back, my shoulder striking the wall. The lantern flared, throwing the reflection across the ceiling. A shimmer of white just beneath the waterline. It moved again. Closer to the edge this time. Slow. Intentional. I could see fingers now. Thin, webbed with something translucent, like they'd been soaking there for years. They brushed the underside of the hatch door, then stopped. The water fell still. Utterly still. I waited. Seconds, minutes maybe, no movement. Only the slow drip of condensation from the walls, hitting the surface below and vanishing without a trace. I closed the hatch, locked it. The key burned against my palm. When I set it down on the table upstairs, it left a small ring of moisture beneath it, like it had been underwater. That night, I woke to a faint metallic clink, the sound of the key rolling slowly across the desk. It stopped just at the edge. Balancing there. When I reached for it, it fell, hit the floor, and from somewhere deep below the foundation, I heard the hatch shift, a soft creak. a breath of air rising through the cracks. I didn't go down to check. Not that night. Not since. But every morning now when I walk past the hatch, the floor is damp beneath my boots. The stones glisten, and in the silence I can hear it. A faint tapping, as if something inside is waiting, reaching upward, patiently feeling for the key. The sea was still that night. Flat as glass, reflecting the thin slice of moon that hung over the horizon. The lighthouse turned slowly above me. Its beam swept across the water, a pale white arc cutting through the mist. I'd grown used to its rhythm. Every 20 seconds, a slow rotation, a brief silence between breaths of light. But that night felt different, heavier somehow. Even the gulls had gone quiet. When the beam passed over the rocks below, something caught my eye. A shape. Small at first, still. I leaned closer to the window. The glass was cool against my forehead, salt crusted along the edges. There, on the farthest set of rocks, a figure stood. Too far to see clearly, but tall enough to break the horizon. The light moved on. Darkness swept in again, covering everything. I waited for the beam to circle back. When it did, the figure was still there, exactly where it had been. At first, I told myself it was driftwood, a trick of the fog. But as the light curved away, I saw how clean its outline was, how it stood upright, facing the tower. I watched the next rotation, then the next. Each time it was there, unmoving. The beam stretched far, touching the waves like a blade of white fire. Each sweep made my chest tighten. I didn't like that I started waiting for it, waiting for the light to reveal it again. To prove it hadn't stepped closer, I counted the seconds between turns. 1, 2, the soft hum of the lantern, the grinding of gears, the slow spin. When the beam reached the rocks again, I gasped. It hadn't moved, but the shadow behind it had changed. Longer, darker, stretching toward the sea. I backed away from the glass. The floorboards creaked under my boots. The sound seemed too loud in the stillness. I thought about turning off the light, just for a moment, to see what would happen in the dark. But I couldn't. It didn't feel right to let the ocean go unlit. Not tonight. Instead, I went down the spiral stairs. Each step groaned with age. The air grew colder the lower I went, thick with the damp scent of iron and salt. At the observation deck, I pushed open the outer door. The wind bit at my face. The sea whispered below, a low hiss through the rocks. The beam swept over the waves again, and there it was, clearer now. The figure stood in shallow water just beyond the last line of stone. It faced the lighthouse directly, arms at its sides. Still as a carved post, the light turned away. Darkness fell. I waited. My breath clouded in the air. When the next beam came, it was closer, only a few feet. But I saw it. The distance between the rocks had changed. It was climbing them slowly between every turn of light. It moved only in shadow. I gripped the railing. My fingers were slick with fog. I told myself to go back inside. Lock the doors. Wait for dawn. But I stayed. Each time the beam came around, it had risen higher, step by step, always facing me. The last sweep caught it fully, and for a breath I wished it hadn't. Its shape was wrong. Too thin, too straight, like the light itself couldn't touch it completely, where its face should have been. There was only dark water pouring down its front, as though it were hollow inside. The light moved on. The sea went black again. I couldn't move. Couldn't even breathe. When the next beam passed, the rocks were empty. The space where it had stood was bare and wet, rippling with the motion of the tide. I backed through the doorway, shut the latch, and listened. Silence. Just the hum of the lamp above, and the faint ticking of the gears. Hours later, I went back up to the lantern room. The first light of morning was already pushing against the glass. I looked down at the rocks one last time. They were bare again. But when the sun caught the water, I saw a thin shadow. The shape of a figure, still and perfect, painted across the surface of the sea. It didn't fade. Not when the tide rose, not when I blinked. It stayed there, as if the light had burned it in place. Now every night, when the beam swings across the ocean, it finds that same shape again. Waiting, not moving, not reaching, just watching. And I don't know if the light is keeping it away or calling it back. The fog rolled in before midnight. Thick, heavy, almost solid. It pressed against the windows like a living thing. I'd seen fog before, but not like this. It swallowed the world. Even the lantern's beam wasn't strong enough to pierce it. Just a dull circle of light, hovering in nothing. Then it began, a deep, low bellow rolling across the sea. Slow, long, heavy enough to shake the glass in its frame. The foghorn. I froze where I stood. The machinery hadn't worked in over 40 years. It was rusted solid, a relic sealed in the lower chamber. But the sound kept coming. Every few minutes, a long, mournful blast that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. Through my ribs, I waited for it to fade. It didn't. I went downstairs one step at a time. Each footfall disappeared into the fog, muffled before it touched the air. The stairs felt endless, spiraling down into silence between each distant call. When I reached the base of the tower, the air was colder. My breath came out in clouds thin as smoke. The old foghorn chamber was half buried behind corroded pipes and salt-streaked walls. The metal hatch creaked when I pulled it open. The hinges cried softly like something waking. Inside, everything was still. The horn sat in its place. A wide brass funnel cracked with age. Cobwebs clung to its rim, dripping with moisture. I touched the side. It was cold, completely lifeless. Then, another blast, so close that it made my teeth ache. The windows rattled upstairs. Dust fell from the ceiling like dry snow. But here, nothing moved, no tremor, no shift in air. The horn hadn't made a sound. The noise was somewhere else, beyond the walls, out at sea. I stepped back, feeling the floor pulse faintly underfoot, not with vibration, but with something slower, like a heartbeat too deep to hear. I climbed back up the stairs, 2 steps at a time, my hand brushing the damp stone. The air was thick with salt. It tasted metallic. When I reached the lantern room, I pressed my face to the glass again. Nothing. Only fog. It looked solid enough to touch. Like a wall of milk, glowing faintly in the sweep of light. Another blast. It rolled in from somewhere far below, swelling through the mist, a sound that didn't fade with distance. It circled instead, echoing around the horizon, as if the sea itself were answering. I could feel it in my chest, in my throat, in my bones. I whispered to myself. Stop. The fog didn't move. The next call came softer, slower, almost gentle. And for a moment I thought I heard words inside it, not spoken, just shaped. A tone that almost meant something. I shut my eyes, but the sound kept going behind my eyelids, deep and slow. When I opened them again, the glass of the lantern room was trembling, not from the air, from inside. Tiny lines of condensation rippled outward in circles, as though the sound were trapped within. I stepped closer, put my hand to the pane. The glass was warm, the beam turned, cutting a slow arc through the fog. And for just a second, I thought I saw movement below, a shimmer in the mist, like something vast and pale turning beneath the surface of the sea. Then the foghorn called again, louder this time. Right beneath me, the floor shook. The metal railing groaned. My breath stuttered in my throat, and then silence, complete. No wind, no hum of machinery, just the hush of my own pulse in my ears. I waited. 5 seconds, 10, then another blast, but faint, farther away this time. It was moving. Each call came from a different place, drifting along the coast, out beyond the rocks, further, further still, until the sound became only an echo. Then nothing. I stayed by the window until dawn. The fog lifted slow, like smoke rising from the sea. The waves were calm again, the horizon clear. But on the rocks below the tower, I saw the outline of the old foghorn's funnel. Not the one in the basement, a second one, half buried in the tide, still gleaming faintly in the morning light. I watched it for a long time. It didn't move. But sometimes, when the wind shifts just right, I still hear it. Low, slow, calling from somewhere just beyond the shore. And every time it comes, the glass trembles again. Like the sea is remembering how to breathe. The sea was calm that night, unnaturally calm. Even the waves seemed to breathe slower, as though holding something beneath them. The air was heavy with salt, thick enough to taste. And the fog, it came in soft, curling over the pier like smoke from a candle just blown out. I had gone out to check the moorings, a habit I'd kept even when there were no boats left to tend. The boards beneath my boots were damp, slick with seaweed. Each step gave a quiet groan, as if the pier were growing tired of standing. That's when I saw the light, a pale glow swinging low along the edge of the fog. At first I thought it was a buoy lantern. Then it moved, a slow, steady rhythm, back and forth, like someone walking. The light drew closer, its reflection trembling across the dark water. And then I saw him, a man standing halfway down the pier. His clothes were soaked through, clinging to him like skin. Old sailor's gear, the kind no one wore anymore. Canvas coat, loose trousers tucked into tall boots. Each dripping thread caught the lantern's glow. He didn't speak, didn't move, except for the faint rise and fall of his chest. The air felt colder near him. I could smell brine and something faintly sour, like kelp that had been left to rot in the sun. I called out. A whisper, barely a word. Hello? No answer. The man just watched me. Or I thought he did. His face was pale. Not white, but drained, as if something had taken the color from him. His eyes were shadowed, dark hollows that didn't quite reflect the light. He lifted the lantern slightly as though to show me something. The glass was cracked. Inside, the flame burned small and blue. A gust of wind passed between us, carrying a sound that wasn't quite a sigh, more like the breath of the tide itself. The man turned, slowly, deliberately, and began walking toward the end of the pier. His boots made no sound, no echo, only the quiet drip of water trailing behind him. I felt something tighten in my throat. A pull, like I should follow, but my legs stayed still. He reached the last post before the sea, lifted the lantern one final time, and stepped forward into the water. There was no splash, no ripple. He didn't sink, didn't struggle. He simply disappeared. The light flickered once above the waves, then went out, and the fog closed in again, sealing the horizon like a wound. I waited. I don't know how long. Long enough for the damp to soak through my sleeves, for my fingers to go numb. Nothing moved, not even the sea. When I finally turned to go, something brushed my ankle. A piece of rope, frayed and wet. It wound itself once around my boot, then slid back into the cracks between the boards. The next morning, I walked down to the shoreline. The tide had gone out, leaving a line of driftwood and shells. And in the middle of it, half buried in sand, was the lantern. Its glass was unbroken now, its metal dry. Inside, a small curl of smoke hung suspended, as if something had just gone out. I brought it back to the lighthouse, set it on the windowsill above my desk. That night, when the fog rolled in again, I thought I saw a glimmer in the glass, a faint pulse of light, blue and unsteady. I stepped closer, and my reflection wavered in the lantern's surface. But there was someone else beside me, a figure, standing in the dark behind the glass, still dripping, still waiting. I blinked, and the light went out. The next day, the lantern was empty. No soot, no wick, just cold brass and the faint scent of salt that never seems to fade. Sometimes, when I walk along the pier, I still feel that same pull, that weight of quiet pressing in from the sea. And out beyond the fog, when the night is calm enough, I swear I can see a small, trembling light, blue against the dark, moving slowly away from shore. I think he's still walking, lantern in hand, searching for something he never meant to lose. And when the wind is just right, I can almost hear him breathing, steady, patient, waiting for me to follow. The tide was low that evening. Bare rocks glistened beneath a thin skin of seawater, breathing in and out with each slow wave. The air carried a cold taste of iron, like rain before it falls, like something waiting. I had gone down to the cove after dusk, lantern in hand, drawn by the clatter I'd heard through the window. At first I thought it was the wind, the usual rattle of chains against the cliffside. But the wind had stopped hours ago. The chains were older than the lighthouse itself, thick links of corroded iron fastened into the black stone. They'd once anchored the great ships that couldn't dock, their weight holding them steady through the storm season. Now they hung loose, useless. Their ends trailed down the slope of rock and disappeared into the mist that hugged the shoreline. The lantern's glow caught on the wet metal, turning the rust into streaks of dull gold. I reached out and touched one. It was colder than I expected, cold enough to sting, and it trembled beneath my fingers, a faint vibration, like something alive just beneath the surface. I stepped back. The chain swayed once, then went still. The fog moved strangely that night. It rolled in quiet spirals, never quite settling. Each time I looked toward the water, it seemed closer. That was when I heard it again. The rattle. Soft at first, then sharper. Links striking together as if pulled tight by a sudden force, but the tide was calm, no waves. No current strong enough to move that much weight. The chain at my feet began to drag, slowly, metal scraping against rock, not toward the sea, but into the fog itself. I leaned closer, my breath catching in my throat. The chain wasn't sinking into water. It was vanishing, link by link, as though being drawn into something unseen. The fog stirred again, and from deep within it came another sound, a low, hollow creak, like a rope straining beneath too much weight. The other chains along the cliff began to move, one after another, each shuddering, stretching tight, then falling slack. The air trembled with a quiet hum. Not wind, not the sea. Something else. I turned to leave, but froze. One of the chains near the base of the rocks had gone completely taut. Its links glistened wet, pulled in a perfect line straight into the white fog. And through the mist, I thought I saw something move. Not a shape, not even a shadow. Just a darker patch, shifting slow beneath the surface of the air. I told myself it was just the fog playing tricks, that maybe the weight of rust had caused the chain to slip. But then it pulled again, harder. The bolts in the rock groaned, metal grinding against stone. And from the distance, somewhere out beyond the edge of sight, came the faint sound of dripping, slow, rhythmic, like footsteps made of water. I took a step back, nearly slipping on the moss. The lantern shook in my hand, its light scattering over the chains. Each one was moving now, all in the same direction, all pulling toward that same place in the fog. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The air went still. No motion, no hum, only the faint echo of my own breath. The chains hung limp again, their ends resting harmlessly on the rocks. I waited there a long time, listening, but the silence was heavier than before, thick, pressing against my ears. When I finally turned back toward the lighthouse, I felt something brush against my boot. I looked down. One of the links was wet, not with seawater, but with something darker, slick and cold. By the time I reached the stairs, the fog had crept up the hill, wrapping around the tower like a slow tide. That night, I dreamt of the chains. I could hear them moving beneath the floorboards, dragging softly across stone, and somewhere deep below, something answered the pull. When I woke, my room smelled faintly of rust, and through the window the fog still lingered, thick, unmoving, as if holding its breath. Now each evening, when the tide turns, I hear them again. The rattle, the slow pull, always in the same rhythm, as if something unseen is climbing closer. The bolts in the cliff have begun to loosen. The chains lean slightly outward, their ends no longer touching the ground. Sometimes when I walk by them, I think I can hear a whisper in the fog. A breath caught between the links, and I wonder, If whatever they once held beneath the sea has finally grown strong enough to pull back. The wind hadn't moved all day. The sea lay still, flat as glass beneath the gray. Inside, the air smelled of dust and old paper, the kind that clings to your throat when you breathe too deeply. I'd been sorting through the archives again, the drawers below the desk, the shelves behind the oil cabinet. That's when I found it. A black leather book, its spine cracked and edges curled with salt. The Lighthouse's final log. The date on the cover was 50 years old. The last keeper's handwriting neat, precise, until it wasn't. The ink faded toward the bottom of the page. The words slanting downward, like someone had written them while the floor was moving. It began like any other entry. Weather, visibility, wind speed. Then it shifted. Storm incoming, it said. But the barometer remained steady. Clouds unchanging. No sign of rain. He called it the storm that would not pass. I turned the page. There were smudges, fingerprints pressed into the ink. The next line was written harder, cutting slightly through the paper. Midnight. Someone is knocking at the door. That was where it stopped. The pen had trailed into a long black scratch, a single unfinished curve. No more pages after that. Just the faint, uneven mark of something pressed against the last sheet. A circle, as if the book had once been set beneath a lamp or a hand. Outside, the pale light from the beacon swept across the fog, painting the walls in slow, ghostly motion. I stared at that final sentence for a long time. The silence in the room grew heavier, like it was waiting. Then, faintly, somewhere below me, a knock. 3 taps. Even. Soft. I froze. The air shifted in the tower. A hollow vibration ran through the metal railing. It wasn't the wind. There was no wind. The knock came again. This time closer. Like it had moved up a floor. The sound carried strangely here. Echoes bouncing in ways that never made sense. I couldn't tell if it came from the door or the wall, or something in between. I set the logbook down, its spine creaking open to that same unfinished line. The lantern flickered, casting a long shadow across the page. Another knock. Right below me, I could feel it through the floorboards. A dull thud that made the dust tremble in the beam of light. I told myself it was the sea, maybe a loose shutter, maybe the metal gate in the wind, but the air was still. The sea hadn't moved all night. I picked up the lantern and walked to the stairwell. The steps groaned, their sound swallowed by the emptiness below. Each turn of the spiral grew darker, the smell of salt and rust deepening with every step. When I reached the base, the door stood closed. Bolted from the inside, I waited. Nothing. The silence stretched until I could hear my own pulse in it. Then, a single knock. Not on the wood this time. From somewhere behind it. Dull. Wet. I stepped back, the lantern shaking slightly in my hand. The light spilled across the floor, catching the edge of something under the crack of the door. Water. Just a thin line at first. Then another droplet slid forward, curling toward my boot. It smelled like seawater, but colder. Older. The wind picked up outside, sudden and sharp, as if it had been holding its breath for hours. I looked at the logbook still sitting open on the desk above. The words burned into my mind. Someone is knocking at the door. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. The next knock came hard enough to shake the frame. Once, twice, then silence. I waited for a voice. There wasn't one, only the soft, slow drip of water beneath the door, and the faint hum of the lantern flame. I turned back toward the stairs, but stopped halfway up. The air had changed. The smell of the sea was gone. In its place, something dry, stale, like metal left too long in the sun. The beacon outside kept turning, its light brushing across the windows every few seconds. And with each pass, the shadow on the floor grew longer. It wasn't mine. The lantern flame bent slightly as though something was standing beside me, blocking the air. I didn't look. I just kept climbing, step after step, until I reached the desk again. The logbook was closed. I hadn't closed it. A new line had appeared across the last page, written in that same slanted hand. Knocking again. He's still outside. The ink was wet. And from below, through the stillness, 3 soft knocks answered back. The storm had passed hours ago, but the air still trembled. The glass in the lantern room gave off a faint hum, a vibration so soft it could have been imagined. I sat beside it, watching the light that wasn't there. The flame was out, and yet the glass glowed. A pale, steady shimmer like moonlight caught beneath water. It shouldn't have. The wick was cold, the oil long spent. Still, the glow moved, slowly shifting inside the glass, as though something dark was swimming within it. At first, I thought it was the reflection of the sea, the waves rolling far below, but there was no rhythm to it. The shapes weren't ripples. They were softer, rounded, twisting like shadows with weight. I leaned closer. The glass was warm, almost alive beneath my fingers. When I pressed my palm against it, a faint pulse came through, beating once, then fading. Outside, the fog lay thick against the horizon, turning the ocean into a sheet of dull gray. No light moved across it, only the faint smell of salt and something metallic beneath it. Inside, the air buzzed. Not loud, just constant. Like a whisper caught between the walls, the glow in the lantern shifted again. Shapes, darker now, stretching, curling upward. For a moment, they looked like hands reaching, grasping for the edge of the glass. I blinked, and they sank back down, breaking apart into smoke. A trick of the light, I told myself, or of tired eyes. Still, I couldn't look away. I tilted my head, trying to catch my reflection, but the light bent strangely. Too bright in some places, too dim in others. I could see the room behind me, the desk, the stairs, but not my face. There was no reflection at all. The thought slipped in quiet, like cold air through a crack. Maybe the glass wasn't reflecting anything anymore. Maybe it was showing something else. The glow pulsed once, soft, and the darkness inside thickened. Not black, but the color of deep water, greenish and endless. Shapes swam through it again. Faster now. Dozens of them, circling, rising toward the surface. I leaned closer, close enough to see the fog of my breath fade across the glass. And that's when I saw him, not clearly at first. Just the outline of a man's face, pale against the darkness inside. The eyes wide open, unblinking. He wore a cap, the kind the old sailors did. His coat was slick with seawater, droplets trailing upward, not down. His lips moved slowly as if forming a word. But no sound came through. I whispered something. I don't remember what. Maybe his name. Maybe my own. The light flared, and for one heartbeat, the glass filled with faces, dozens, all pale, all staring. Then just as quickly they vanished. The glow dimmed, falling back into a faint blue haze. The hum in the room faded. I stepped back, my pulse stuttering in the quiet. The air felt colder now, heavier, as though the walls had drawn closer. I turned toward the stairs. Halfway down, something flickered behind me. The glow again. Brighter this time, I froze. The light pulsed once, twice, and within it, a shadow moved. Not inside the glass, but beyond it. As if someone stood just on the other side, watching through the curve of it. I could see the faint outline of his hand pressing against the inside of the lens. The same pale skin. The same dark eyes. I wanted to run, but I couldn't. The hum returned, stronger now. It filled my head, pressing behind my eyes. Every heartbeat matched it, like something alive in the air. The figure in the glass tilted its head slowly, like it was studying me. The surface rippled, distorted, and for an instant it wasn't him looking out. It was me, my face, blank, still, staring back from inside the glow. The hum stopped. Everything went quiet. The lantern went dark. I stood there, the afterimage of my own reflection burning behind my eyelids. When I opened them again, the glass was empty. Only the faint outline of my breath fogged across it. No glow, no faces, nothing, but the glass was still warm. And when I looked closer, deep beneath its surface, I could see something moving again, slow, careful, like it was waiting for the light to return. Low tide always made the air feel heavier. The fog clung lower to the rocks, and every breath carried salt and rust. I went down the cliff path alone that night, just before dawn, when the sea lay still and the waves whispered only against stone. That's when I saw it again. The anchor, half buried in the black rock, its iron arms spread wide like something caught mid-crawl. Chains thicker than tree trunks trailed away from it, links the size of my hands, each one slick with green moss and rust. No ship could have carried it. No storm could have dropped it there. It looked older than the sea itself. When the tide was low, the water retreated far enough to expose the whole thing. The base twisted deep into the stone, like the rock had melted around it once and then cooled. I used to think it was just an old relic, something left from another century, until the first time I heard it move. It was subtle at first, a low, drawn-out groan that rolled through the cliffs and into my chest. The chains trembled, just slightly, as if something below was pulling, but the sea stayed calm. Flat as glass, not a single wave broke against the rocks. I watched it for an hour that night. The fog thickened until I couldn't see where the chain ended. It just disappeared into the mist, stretching toward a horizon I couldn't find. The sound came again, a deeper pull. The anchor shifted, just a fraction, but the stones beneath it cracked. It felt wrong to be that close, like standing beside something asleep that shouldn't be woken. I tried to back away, but the air was heavy. Each step dragged, like walking through thick water. The chain moved again. A single link lifted, then fell back against the rock with a hollow thud. I froze. It wasn't the sea pulling it. It was something deeper, something under the earth. The fog rippled in time with the sound. And for a heartbeat, I thought I heard another breath beneath it. A sigh, long and tired, coming from the water's edge. I turned toward the horizon. The fog was shifting there too. Thick folds of it rolling inward slowly like it was being pulled from below. Every instinct told me to run, but I stayed. I had to see. The anchor moaned again, louder this time. The rocks trembled, small stones tumbling into the cracks that split beneath my feet. The air smelled of iron and rot. Wet metal, old salt. The chain moved once more. A slow, dragging sound. And this time the fog seemed to answer, lifting in one place, curling upward like breath. Something was pulling it, pulling everything down. The light from my lantern flickered, then dimmed. For a moment, I thought I saw movement inside the mist. Not shapes, but shadows shifting together, stretching along the water, reaching for the chain. They clung to it, slid along its length, and then vanished into the fog where the chain disappeared. The anchor gave one last deep groan. A sound like stone breaking underwater. And then silence. The tide began to return, slow waves pressing against my boots. I looked down. The cracks beneath the anchor had widened. Water filled them quickly, dark and cold. When I turned back toward the cliffs, I realized the ground had sunk slightly, as if something massive below had shifted and settled deeper. I climbed back before the tide swallowed the rocks. The air was trembling all around me, not from the wind, but from the faint hum that lingered beneath the surface, like the echo of that last pull. When I reached the top, I looked back one last time. The fog had swallowed everything. Only the tip of the anchor's arm remained visible. It looked smaller now, like it was sinking. By the next morning, it was gone. The rocks where it had been were cracked and uneven. The sea rushed in and out of the hollow space below, breathing in time with the tide. Some nights, when the wind comes from the west, I still hear it. That same low groan, rising from beneath the cliffs. Long, tired, dragging something I can't see. And sometimes, just before dawn, the mist outside my window moves with the tide, pulling toward the sea, as if answering the call of something that was never meant to be anchored. The nights have been colder lately. The kind of cold that creeps through stone, that lives in the floorboards, and settles behind the ribs. I keep the lantern low, just a soft circle of light beside the bed. The rest of the room is shadows, long, quiet, waiting. Outside, the fog moves against the lighthouse glass. It presses and folds, breathing slow, as if the night itself were alive. The sea is silent tonight. No waves, no wind. Only the hum of the tower and the faint pulse of the lantern flame. I can't sleep. Haven't slept much these past few nights. Something about the stillness feels wrong. I lay there, watching the round window across from me. It's high, just above the bed. The glass always looks damp, as if the fog is trying to seep through. That's when I saw it. A face, pale, blurred by the mist, pressing against the window. Not a trick of light. Not reflection. It was there. The skin looked wrong. Smooth in places, bloated in others. The eyes were dark, hollow enough that I could see the faint glow of the lantern reflected inside them. It didn't move, didn't blink. Just watched me. I froze. The window is 3 stories high. No ladder, no ledge. Nothing a person could stand on. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't dare move, afraid it might react, afraid it might smile. The fog thickened, rolling slow across the glass. For a moment, it swallowed the face completely. When it cleared, the window was empty again, just the soft press of mist curling against the round frame. I sat there for a long time, trying to steady my breathing. The walls creaked with the cold. Each sound made me flinch. I told myself I'd imagined it, that it was just exhaustion, the way the fog bends light around the tower sometimes. But deep down, I knew better. The next morning, I checked the window from the outside. The stones beneath it were slick with dew, but there were marks, long, faint streaks, as though something had dragged its fingers across the glass. From the outside, I tried to wash them away. They didn't fade, just shifted color, like the residue was beneath the surface somehow. That night, I kept the shutters closed. Bolted them tight, but I couldn't stop hearing it. A slow tap, soft, deliberate, like someone lightly brushing their nails along the wood. I held my breath, counted the seconds between each one. 3 taps, then nothing. The silence after felt heavier than before. I thought about opening the shutters, just to prove there was nothing there. But I couldn't. Something deep in my chest told me not to. Hours passed. The lantern burned low. The fog outside never thinned. Then, a sound from above, a faint creak, like weight shifting along the iron balcony that wrapped around the lantern room. I stared at the ceiling. There shouldn't have been anyone up there. No one could climb that high without crossing the narrow stairs that led past my room. And I'd have heard that. Another creak, closer, followed by the faintest drag, metal brushing against glass. The lantern flame trembled. I couldn't move. Every instinct screamed that something was circling the tower. Slowly, patiently, feeling its way along the outer walls, then silence. Again, complete, utter silence. The kind that makes your own heart beat too loud. When dawn came, I opened the shutters. The window was clear again. No marks, no face. Just fog drifting out to sea. For a while, I almost convinced myself it was over. Until the evening mist rolled in again, thicker this time, heavy as smoke. I was writing in the logbook when I felt it. That familiar shift in the air. A cold that wasn't just from the wind. I looked up and the room felt smaller. The window darker, then a shadow passed behind the glass. Not a shape, a blur. Something that moved within the fog, slowly turning, as if searching for the right angle. The breath left my body. I stared until my eyes burned, and then I saw it again. The face, closer this time, pressed against the pane so tightly the glass seemed to bend inward. Its mouth hung slightly open, as if trying to speak or breathe, but there was no sound, no movement of lips. Only that endless, steady stare. My lantern went out. The room fell into perfect darkness. Only the pale light from outside remained, washing over the walls in trembling ripples. I reached for the matches, hands shaking, and when I struck one, the light flickered across the window. It was empty again. No fog, no face, just clear glass and the reflection of my own trembling outline. I blew out the match, sat in silence. and listened. No tapping, no creaks, only the quiet hum of the sea below. But I still can't sleep. Because sometimes, when the nights are still enough, I wake to the faint press of something cold against the glass above my bed. Not moving. Not knocking, just waiting. It was just past midnight. The fog had thickened again. Heavy. Salt clinging to the air like breath you could almost touch. The sea below moved slow and dark, its surface trembling with a kind of waiting. I was leaning against the railing, listening to the water press against the rocks. The tide was low. The world felt distant, as if everything beyond the mist had fallen away. That's when I heard it. A faint hum. Far out where the horizon should be. At first I thought it was the wind, the way it drifts through cracks in the cliffs making the air sing softly. But this had rhythm, voices, dozens of them rising and falling together, woven like waves. It was beautiful, slow, tragic somehow. Each note trembled through the fog, reaching the tower like a memory, like something that didn't want to be forgotten. I leaned closer to the edge, listening. They were singing in harmony, but not words I knew, something older. Low and liquid, as if spoken through the throat of the sea itself. It filled me with a kind of calm I can't explain. I felt the pull of it, gentle at first, almost kind. I didn't even realize my feet had moved closer to the stairs, to the narrow path leading down toward the shore. The air grew colder the closer I came to the water. The stones beneath my boots slick with moss, shining faintly in the lantern light. And the song, it grew clearer. What had sounded like music before wasn't. The rhythm was still there, but beneath it, something else? Gaps between the melody, short, uneven breaths, voices breaking, catching, not singing, choking. Each note was cut with the strain of air forced through water. I could hear the bubbles, the gurgling drag of words that wanted to surface but couldn't. I stopped. The wind had gone still, only the voices remained, begging. It wasn't a song. It was a plea. For a moment I thought I heard my name. Soft, almost kind. Then again, fainter, like someone calling through glass. My hand shook. The lantern flickered. And still I couldn't look away from the sea. Shapes moved within the mist. Pale, half-formed. I couldn't tell if they were people or tricks of the moonlight through fog. But the longer I stared, the more certain I became. They were faces, hundreds of them, drifting just below the surface. Mouths open, eyes wide, voices blending into that terrible broken choir. The song rose again, filling the air like the sea had learned to breathe. It pulled at the rocks, at the tower, at me. I wanted to run, but I couldn't. I couldn't stop listening. Every voice carried a different tone, a different kind of despair. Some sounded like weeping, others like laughter turned inside out. Some just whispered the same word again and again, too low to understand. I felt it crawling beneath my skin, that sound. Like salt water filling every hollow space. I took a step back. The singing faltered. Just slightly. It was as if they'd noticed. As if every single one of them had turned toward me. The water near the shore rippled, and I saw them, hands white and swollen, breaking the surface for only a second before sinking again. Fingers twitching in rhythm with the song. Something deep below pulled tight, and the sea drew itself inward, like breath before a scream. Then silence. Everything stopped. Not even the waves moved. Only the echo of that last note remained, stretching thin across the fog. I didn't breathe. Didn't dare. For a moment I thought I'd imagined it all. That maybe the sea was only playing tricks again. Then I heard it. One last voice. Close this time. Whispering just below my feet. Barely breaking through the water, a single phrase, wet and trembling. Please, don't leave us. I dropped the lantern. Its light burst and hissed against the stones. And in the sudden dark, I saw their faces again. Pale shapes twisting beneath the waves, as if the ocean itself was breathing them in. When dawn came, the sea was calm, perfectly still, no voices, no faces, only the faint taste of salt on the air. and the echo of that melody still humming somewhere deep inside me. Sometimes, when the wind carries just right, I think I hear them again. Not singing this time, just breathing, waiting for me to listen. The fog had stayed for 3 nights. Thick, quiet, the kind that muffles everything, even the sea. Up in the lantern room, the light turned in slow circles, casting a pale sweep across the mist. It never reached far, just enough to show me how alone the tower really was. There's a chair up here, an old wooden one. Its legs warped, its paint long gone, salt-eaten and gray. The others used to call it the keeper's chair. No one ever sat in it. They said the last keeper used to. No reflection, no glimmer, just the pale, empty white. I pressed my forehead to the glass. The world outside didn't move. Even my own reflection looked faint, as if I was fading too. I spoke aloud, though I don't remember what I said. A name, maybe, or a prayer. The light spun again, passing across me, and for a second, it felt like it was looking back. The fog pulsed faintly with each rotation, as if answering the beam's call. Like something vast was breathing out there, just beyond sight. The tower creaked beneath me, not from wind. There was no wind, but from age, from memory. The old wood groaned like an exhale, and I realized it was too quiet to be real. No water, no air, just silence pressing in, thick and heavy, like the world itself had stopped. I climbed higher to the catwalk outside the lantern room. The fog met me at the door, cold and wet against my skin. It smelled faintly of salt, but not the living kind. Stale, ancient. The beam swept across again, illuminating the mist. I could see nothing but shifting white, folding and unfolding, like waves that had forgotten how to move. And then, for a moment, I saw something else. Shapes, far away. Dark, unmoving outlines just at the edge of where the light could reach. Not ships, not rocks, just forms. They vanished when the light passed over them again. The fog closed in tighter. My breath left no cloud this time. It just disappeared, like everything else. The light turned once more. Its hum grew louder, vibrating through the metal, through the glass, through my ribs, and in that vibration, I heard something faint. A whisper, or maybe just an echo of one. Too soft to understand, but it came from inside the beam itself, as if the light was speaking, but only to what wasn't there. I looked down again. There was no ground below, only mist, rolling, folding, endless. The lighthouse wasn't standing anymore. It was suspended, drifting, and still the light kept turning, faithful, blind, searching for something to save. I placed my hand on the glass. It was warm now, too warm. My skin tingled, like static crawling beneath it. I closed my eyes. For a moment, I imagined the sea again. The pull of the tide, the hum of waves against the rocks, the rhythm that used to fill these nights. But it was gone. Only the fog remained, and the light. When I opened my eyes, the beam had stopped turning. It faced outward, frozen in the fog, as if it had found what it was looking for. The hum faded. The warmth left the glass. The light began to dim, slowly, softly, until it was nothing but a pale ember in the mist. And I understood. There was no one left to guide. No ships, no shores. Just this. A final light burning against an empty horizon. I sat beside it until dawn that never came. The fog never lifted. The world never stirred. Only the faint, quiet hum returned. A heartbeat that wasn't mine. A pulse deep within the glass, steady, patient, waiting, maybe for the sea to return, maybe for another keeper, or maybe for me to finally let go. I leaned back, feeling the tower's slow breathing beneath me, and closed my eyes. The light flickered once, and then, for the first time, the lighthouse went dark. Watch the horizon from there. Even during storms, especially during storms, now it just sits in the corner by the window, facing the sea. Always facing the sea. I noticed it first on my second night. It was rocking, just slightly. Back and forth, no wind, no movement in the room. Just that quiet, steady creak. It stopped when I stepped closer. And when I turned away, it started again. I tried to tell myself it was the boards shifting, the tower breathing, but that lie didn't hold long. By the third night, the sound was louder. Each creak deeper, more deliberate, like someone heavier than me had just sat down. The lantern flame flickered with every motion, casting long shadows that slid across the walls, stretching thin and trembling. I stood there a long time watching the chair move. The longer I looked, the slower it rocked, until it stopped completely. Silence pressed against my ears. Even the sea seemed to hold its breath. I could smell the salt, and the faint, wet wood beneath the glass. Something colder, too, like iron touched by rain. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe curiosity, maybe something else. But I walked toward it. Each step felt heavier than the last. The boards beneath me groaned, old wood complaining at the weight. I stood beside the chair, close enough to see faint indentations in the seat, too deep for dust to hide. As if someone still sat there night after night, I reached out. My fingers brushed the top rail. Cold, colder than the air around it. The fog outside pressed against the window. The light spun once more, and for a second I thought I saw movement. Just beyond the glass, something standing on the rocks below. Something tall. Still, but the beam swept past and it was gone. My pulse wouldn't slow. The tower hummed softly around me, every sound sharper, closer. I sat down in the chair. The wood groaned beneath me. It didn't feel old anymore. It felt occupied. The air changed, thicker somehow. I could feel the chill creep up through the seat, into my back, up my neck, and then the rocking began again. Not by my movement. Not by anything I did. The chair moved on its own. Slowly at first, then steady. Back and forth. Back and forth, I couldn't get up. Couldn't move. Something pressed against my shoulder. A hand. Cold as seawater. Heavy. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't turn. I couldn't. The hand stayed there, fingers long and damp, resting like they'd always belonged. Outside, the foghorn wailed once. A low, distant cry that trembled through the glass. The lantern flame dimmed, casting everything in soft gray. I felt the chair lean slightly forward, as if whoever sat behind me was looking out again, watching the sea. I tried to speak, to say stop, but the word froze halfway out, trapped in my chest. There was a whisper behind my ear, not a word. Just breath, cold and steady. Then the hand lifted. The rocking stopped, and I was alone again. The chair stood still. The fog pressed close. Only my heartbeat filled the silence. I left the lantern room after that. But even now, when the night is quiet enough, I can still hear the creak of that chair above me, slow, patient, as if the keeper has returned to his post, and I was only borrowing his place for a moment. Sometimes I think he's still sitting there, just behind the glass, waiting for the sea to answer back. And when the fog rolls in, I swear I can feel that same cold hand again, resting softly on my shoulder, reminding me whose light this really is. It began just before dusk. A strange glow behind the horizon, where the sea met the edge of the sky. The air was heavy, thick with the promise of rain. Even the gulls were silent. Dark clouds gathered in slow folds, stacking one over another until the world above looked bruised. I watched from the lantern room, hands against the cold glass. Lightning flickered, soft and distant, but no thunder followed, just light and silence. It was beautiful at first, like the sea had fallen asleep beneath a painted sky. But there was something wrong in it, too. Something hollow. The wind never came. The waves stayed still. Even the ropes along the pier hung motionless. And yet the lighthouse began to tremble, barely at first. A quiet hum under my feet like a pulse moving through stone, then stronger. Enough that the lantern rattled in its casing. Dust shook loose from the rafters. I stepped back, expecting the storm to break, for the windows to rattle and the sea to rise, but nothing moved. Only the tower. The sea lay flat as glass, the clouds frozen in place. Lightning flared again, white veins crawling silently across the sky. No sound, no rain, only the trembling stone. I pressed my ear to the wall. It was warm. alive almost. Like something was pushing from the outside, testing the seams of the lighthouse. The floorboards creaked beneath me. A low vibration rolled through the tower, deep enough to feel in my ribs. The lantern flame wavered, though there was no draft. For a heartbeat, the light dimmed, and I thought I saw movement inside the glass, as if something vast had brushed against the lens. A shadow. No shape. No edges, just a darkness that moved differently than the night. I backed away. My breath came out in little bursts of fog. The air was colder now. Every breath left a taste of metal on my tongue. Below, the spiral stairs groaned. One step, then another. Slow, deliberate, but no one else was in the tower. I called out once, my voice smaller than I meant it to be. It didn't echo, it just stopped, like the air swallowed it whole. The trembling grew again, so strong this time that the oil lamp on my desk slid an inch across the wood. Its flame danced, then went still, as if frozen mid-flicker. Outside, lightning tore the horizon in half. The reflection flashed across the window, white and cold. And for a moment I saw a figure in the glass, standing right beside me. I turned. No one, only the chair, and the stillness. The next flash showed the same thing, the same outline. Closer this time. It wasn't outside. It was inside the reflection, inside the glass itself. The tower shook again, harder than before. The lantern groaned in its frame. The light began to spin faster. Though I hadn't touched the mechanism, the beam sliced through the fog, over and over, until it caught something out there, on the surface of the sea, ripples, spreading outward in perfect circles, as if something enormous had surfaced, just beyond the rocks, but I couldn't see what. Only the faint disturbance, the sea shivering under its own calm. I could feel it in the floor, a heartbeat too large to belong to the tower. And then it stopped. Everything. The shaking. The light. The reflection. Even the lightning froze, mid-branch, against the sky. Silence pressed in on all sides. Not peaceful. Not empty, just waiting. I stood there, unable to move, feeling the last tremor fade beneath my feet. The sea was flat again. The clouds still hung above, but the light had gone from them. No rain ever fell. No wind ever came. Only that strange quiet, as if the storm had passed through something else. Not here, but close enough to shake the walls of this world. Later, when I checked the lantern glass, there were faint streaks across it. Thin trails like fingerprints dragged through mist, but colder, sharper. They faced inward. I wiped them away, but they came back by dawn, a little higher each time, as if whatever had pressed against the tower was still reaching, trying to get in. The sea remains calm tonight, the horizon empty, but the clouds have returned, layered dark and silent above the water. And sometimes, when lightning flickers out there, far beyond the rocks, I feel the tower hum again, softly, like it remembers something, like it's bracing for a storm that never really left. It was my final night in the tower. The air was still, the sea quiet. Even the gulls had stopped calling days ago. I climbed the narrow stairs one last time, my hand tracing the grooves worn deep into the railing. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the stone itself didn't want me to reach the top. The lantern room was waiting. And the light, it was brighter than I'd ever seen it. It wasn't the soft golden flame I knew. It burned white, almost silver, filling the glass with a steady hum that I could feel in my chest. I stood there for a while, letting the warmth of it press against my face. But the warmth wasn't right. It didn't flicker. It didn't breathe. It pulsed, like a heartbeat. I looked out through the window, expecting to see the horizon, the black line where sea met sky, the endless motion of water below, but there was nothing, no sea. No horizon, only fog, white, thick, endless, stretching out in every direction as far as the light could reach. The rocks below were gone. The waves, the sand, the shore, gone. The lighthouse floated in it, alone. For a long moment, I thought maybe the storm had risen again, that the sea was hiding beneath the mist, but there was no movement, no sound, only that steady hum from the lantern. It turned slowly, its great beams sweeping through the fog, searching, but the light fell on nothing.